As detailed in Part 1 of this video installment on the battle actions of Day 1, the noon lull was now well into a second hour. The rebel strength stood at a bit over 22,000 infantry and over 80 artillery pieces. While there were no infantry engagements during the lull, except for scattered skirmishing, there was a fair amount of Confederate artillery fire. It harassed the arrival of Union infantry and artillery reinforcements. At this point, the Union numbers had risen to slightly over 14,000 infantry and cavalry troopers and 28 cannon. But within the coming hour, the Federals would even the numbers of soldiers and artillery pieces and set the stage for some horrific fighting yet to come. As news of the arrival of Rodes's division into the woods on Oak Hill reached Generals Lee and Hill, the assessment of the situation that lay before the Army of Northern Virginia began to dramatically change. Initially not wanting to bring on a general engagement until the whole army was up, Lee now realized he could attack the lesser-numbered Union forces before him from both the west and now the north. Part 2 of this video will pick up where Part 1 left off. It will show and discuss significant unit position adjustments with respect to Hill's Corps, while Rodes's division of Ewell's Corps was revealing itself and settling in on Oak Hill. It will also cover the additional reinforcements arriving for the Army of the Potomac, up to the beginning of the deployment of the 11th Corps on the plains north of Gettysburg. Brigadier General Johnston Pettigrew's brigade of nearly 2,600 men was ordered to move from the back slope of Hare's Ridge to a position on the immediate right flank of Colonel John Brockenborough's small brigade of almost 1,000. Brockenborough moved to the eastern edge of the woods leading back up to the crest of Hare's Ridge, and Pettigrew advanced down that slope to join him there. They were both now in the perfect position to, at the appropriate time, resume a heavy assault on Meredith, at the western edge of Herbst Woods, on the opposite side of Willoughby Run. To make matters worse for Meredith, his front was barely long enough to oppose Brockenborough, much less Pettigrew's line that extended 500 yards further southeast beyond Meredith's left. But Doubleday had an ace in the hole in Biddle's brigade as a counter to Pettigrew's outflanking of Meredith. Biddle began an easterly move toward the Seminary Swale shortly after Union scouts reported that Pettigrew was moving toward the crest of Hare's Ridge. Cooper's battery raced ahead of the brigade and took up a position facing Hare's Ridge Woods with an eye on the Confederate infantry targets within. Biddle's regiments initially formed on the eastern back slope of the lower end of McPherson Ridge. As Biddle moved, so did Archer. His battered brigade, now commanded by Fry, moved to the far right beyond the Mill Road, on Pettigrew's right. There they guarded the division's flank from harassment by Gamble's troopers. They operated essentially on the defensive during the afternoon, positioned in line of battle with their right refused to protect the far right flank of the Confederate Army. While Heth adjusted the positions of Pettigrew and Fry to their rear back on Knoxland Ridge, Pender's division was also moving forward, closer to the front. Author Harry Fonce, in his book Gettysburg Day 1, writes, quote, "With its brigades in lines of battle, the men of the division tramped east across the fields. The division advanced for a half a mile. It halted at a small stream that crossed its front. After a pause of about an hour, they advanced another half mile." Unquote. They halted on Hare's Ridge in position to support Heth's afternoon advance against Meredith and Stone, once the heavy fighting resumed. As Rodes's 8,000 Confederates were arriving to the north, To the south, Federal strength also continued to grow. Brigadier General John Robinson's 1st Corps division of 3,000 men was traversing the fields west of the Emmitsburg Road, en route to the seminary. The brigade of Brigadier General Gabriel Paul led the column, followed by Brigadier General Henry Baxter's brigade. Paul established a reserve north-to-south line of battle, just west of the seminary. Minutes later, Baxter arrived and halted behind Paul on the eastern back slope of the ridge. It was at this time that progress was finally made getting some Federal artillery redeployed against the Confederates on Schurz Ridge. Of the earlier fiasco deploying Reynolds' battery, Bradley Gottfried, in his book The Artillery of Gettysburg, writes, quote, "His order for artillery support countermanded by Wainwright, Wadsworth cast about desperately for assistance. He would again call up Calef's battery and told Calef to take 2 sections of his battery to return to McPherson Ridge. Calef knew it was suicide, and he strenuously protested the order." Unquote. Of Cutler's brigade, after they reunited at the edge of Shed's Woods, Harry Fonts writes, quote, "Cutler received orders to advance his 3 mauled regiments from behind Oak Ridge to the positions they occupied at the beginning of the battle." Unquote. The 56th Pennsylvania and 76th and 147th New York moved out and were soon joined by the 95th New York. But as they were moving north, Confederate skirmish lines of Iverson and O'Neill were probing to the south and were soon within range of Cutler. Shortly after the bulk of Cutler's brigade moved north, Hall's 3-gun battery followed. In Hall's official report, he writes he was ordered to, quote, "go to the right along the woods, pass over the crest and over a ravine, and there take a position. I moved right until met by an orderly who informed me I was going directly into enemy lines which were advancing from this direction." Unquote. He halted his gun column and, quote, "rode forward, but before reaching the described position, was fired upon by enemy skirmishers. I then countermarched my battery and moved near the seminary." Unquote. As Calef's battery redeployed on West McPherson Ridge, they immediately received renewed fire from the strong Confederate artillery line on Schurz Ridge. Making matters worse, Brander's battery moved to the far left, where it occupied high ground about 300 yards north-northwest of the Willis farm buildings. From this position, they were able to pound Calef with enfilading fire. Then, the on-again, off-again, on-again deployment of Reynolds' 6 guns finally took place. They unlimbered to Calef's right and strengthened the Union counter-battery fire. But rebel shells from both the Ridge guns to the front and Brander to the right immediately made the position untenable. Simultaneous with Reynolds' arrival, the 84th New York, also known as the 14th Brooklyn, and the 6th Wisconsin moved west from Shed's Woods and formed a support line to the rear of both batteries. As Hall backtracked, Cutler's 4 regiments in front of Shed's Woods, receiving flanking fire from O'Neill's skirmishers, swung their lines to face north to ease the pressure. But the rebel skirmish fire would shortly be the least of their concerns. Carter's and Fry's rebel batteries on Oak Hill, having been in position for about a half hour, observing 1st Corps infantry and artillery movements to their front, opened fire. Their effective fire immediately hit Cutler, and within minutes his regiments rushed east to the shelter of Shed's Woods. The surprise artillery fire from Carter's and Fry's batteries on Oak Hill triggered a response from Reynolds' Union battery on West McPherson Ridge. After O'Neill's brigade took a few casualties from this shelling, Fonce explains, quote, Rhodes then moved the brigade back, abreast with Iverson's, to give it more shelter. This would have placed the right of O'Neill's line on the crest of the ridge where the woods widens and on a line directly east of the Hoffman farm buildings. Fry's battery would have been posted to its front. As Reynolds' battery was fiercely engaged against the rebel guns on Schurz Ridge, against Brander's battery to the northwest, and against Carter's guns on Oak Hill, Calef's two deployed sections, commanded by Purgel and Newman, were about used up. Gottfried writes, quote, After being pounded for 15 minutes, now in a deadly crossfire, Calef moved his guns approximately 500 yards south, where they dropped trail on the east side of Herbst Woods. This position offered more protection from the Confederate guns on Schurz Ridge, unquote. At the same time, skirmisher engagements west of the seminary were also heating up. Biddle's brigade had formed on the reverse slope of the southern end of McPherson Ridge. Despite the surprise artillery fire over a mile in the distance to their north, they soon moved west over the ridge and down to Willoughby Run, forming on the left of the 19th Indiana. Fonce writes, quote, No one said who ordered the brigade to this position or why. Possibly Doubleday or Rowley deemed it desirable to extend the line of the Iron Brigade along the run. The trees of McPherson Woods afforded the Iron Brigade some shelter, but Biddle and his men had little cover, unquote. The higher ground to the west was full of concealed Confederate skirmishers. They fired down on the Federals, who were in open ground and couldn't see the rebels to return the deadly fire. The brigade soon fell back to the reverse slope of the ridge, except for the 20th New York State Militia, who halted their withdrawal on the ridge's crest. Meanwhile, having just left West McPherson Ridge and now sheltered by Herbst Woods on their left, Calef's horse battery, at its new position, immediately began to engage Carter's artillery battalion on Oak Hill. But Reynolds' battery was still at the exposed position, to the right of the location from whence Calef withdrew. Of the situation, Bradley Gottfried writes, quote, Reynolds' battery arrived before Calef left his exposed position north of the Chambersburg Pike. Even before they could unlimber, Reynolds' guns were hit by enfilading fire from Pegram and McIntosh's guns on Schurz Ridge and Carter's guns on Oak Hill. It was only a matter of time before the concentrated enemy crossfire forced the battery back to a more secure location, unquote. Just like Calef's battery minutes earlier, Reynolds' battery, now commanded by Breck, after Reynolds was wounded, moved back to the broad swale between Seminary Ridge and the rear of McPherson Woods. There, they too fronted north and fired at Carter's guns on Oak Hill. At about the same time, back on the plains to the east, Blackford's sharpshooter battalion continued to pressure Devin's dismounted troopers, whose lines begrudgingly withdrew back toward the town while they waited for infantry reinforcements. With the resistance before the rebels stiffening, Blackford's line was reinforced by additional skirmishers from Doles's brigade. Foreshadowing events to come, the 17th Pennsylvania established a defensive line on Blotcher's Knoll, which would years later take on the name Barlow's Knoll, commemorating the Union division under Brigadier General Francis Barlow, who would fight there later in the day. The Union reinforcing infantry, destined to relieve Devin, and whose leading division was at about this time moving north through the streets of Gettysburg, belonged to the 11th Corps. In part 1 of this video, all of these units are shown either arriving on the battlefield or are shown as already being present. The 11th Corps was the last of the units to arrive on the battlefield during the noon lull. Many historical narratives state that the commencement of the artillery fire from Oak Hill signaled the beginning of the end of the noon lull, and while it would be another half hour or so before strong lines of skirmishers engaged face to face, and another hour plus before the brigades of opposing infantry would face off, at this point Doubleday realized that troops were needed to the north. The appearance of Rodes's entire division on Oak Hill and on the plains below made it abundantly clear that the First Corps' right was in a precarious state. But as would be the case over and over during the Battle of Gettysburg, hour by hour there would always be another significant force arriving at seemingly just the right moment. Earlier it was Rodes's division, adding 8,000 men and more artillery to the fight, and now it would be the Union 11th Corps, with 9,200 men and 28 guns, upping the ante. South of town, Schurz's division of Howard's 11th Corps was moving up the Taneytown Road. While Major General Oliver Howard was the commander of the 11th Corps, his arrival on the battlefield in the wake of Reynolds' death resulted in his elevation to left-wing commander of the Union Army of the Potomac. As such, Major General Carl Schurz assumed command of the 11th Corps, and Brigadier General Alexander Schimmelpfennig took command of Schurz's 3rd Division. At the head of the column, just south of town, was Schimmelpfennig's 1st Brigade of just under 1,700, now commanded by Colonel George vonAmsberg. Behind vonAmsberg marched Colonel Waldemir Szosanowski's 3rd Brigade of just over 1,400 men. Dilger's battery followed those 2 brigades. On a converging course, marching along the Emmetsburg Road, came the 11th Corps' 1st Division, commanded by Brigadier General Francis Barlow. His column was headed by the 1,100-man 1st Brigade of Colonel Leopold von Gilsa. Behind von Gilsa came the 2nd Brigade of Brigadier General Adelbert Ames and his 1,300-plus men. Back on the Taneytown Road, about a quarter hour behind Dilger's battery, came Brigadier General Adolf von Steinwehr's 2nd Division. Colonel Charles Coster's 1st Brigade of about 1,200 men was in the lead. Following Coster was Colonel Orlando Smith's 2nd Brigade of slightly over 1,600 men. As the result of an order from Howard to hasten the artillery along, Major Thomas Osborne, in command of the 11th Corps Artillery Brigade, ordered Wheeler's battery to double-quick the last 4 miles to Cemetery Hill. Once there, the battery paused and waited for orders. The remaining 3 11th Corps batteries, commanded by Wiedrich, Heckman, and Wilkeson, bumped along at the rear of the column, almost an hour behind Smith. While the 11th Corps was approaching Gettysburg from the south, Doubleday, northwest of town, was addressing his concern about a Confederate attack on his right. He ordered Robinson to send a brigade north to strengthen the Union forces facing Doles. Mere minutes after the arrival of his brigade to the rear slope of Seminary Ridge, Baxter ordered the 11th Pennsylvania and 97th New York north to Oak Ridge. Led by a company of skirmishers of the 97th, they moved past Cutler's regiments and took up a position at the north edge of Shed's Woods, facing Dole's and his skirmishers in the field before them. The 97th skirmish line continued out into those fields, momentarily surprising the rebels there and pushing them back. While Baxter was moving, so was vonAmsberg, now in command of Schimmelpfennig's brigade, reaching the southern edge of town on the Taneytown Road. Harry Font states that the leading elements of Schurz's division reached Cemetery Hill about 12:30. They marched north on Washington Street, with 4 companies of the 45th New York racing ahead toward the plains north of town. Author and Gettysburg Park Ranger Matt Atkinson, in his 2015 essay, General George Dole's Georgia Brigade on July 1st, writes, quote, "The first Bluecoats on the field, the 45th New York, deployed 4 companies as skirmishers and moved directly across the Georgians' front from left to right toward the McLean farm in front of Blackford sharpshooters," unquote. As the 45th New York advance companies pushed back Blackford's right, the balance of the 45th and vonAmsberg's other 4 regiments established an initial line between the Mummasburg Road and the Carlisle Pike. They relieved the 6th New York Cavalry, who soon would move off to the east to guard the York Pike. All signs pointed to a renewal of heavy fighting. Just earlier, Wadsworth sent a note to Howard and Schurz that the enemy was retiring and urged an advance. Then a few minutes later, Doubleday reported that he was not concerned about his left, but rather about his right and an advance by Rhodes. The Union Army had a decision to make. Harry Fonts precisely described the dilemma. Quote, "On Cemetery Hill, Howard and Schurz were able to see Confederates on Oak Hill, but they could not estimate their strength. Schurz observed, either the enemy was before us in a small force, and then we had to push him with all possible vigor, or he had the principal part of his army there, and then we had to establish ourselves in a position which would enable us to maintain ourselves until the arrival of reinforcements. Either of these cases being possible, a provision was made for both." Unquote. To accomplish both ends, Howard asked Schurz, as acting corps commander, to post his and Barlow's divisions to the right of the First Corps on Oak Ridge, while vonSteinwehr's division and the extra batteries remained in reserve on Cemetery Hill. Fonts writes, quote, "Schimmelpfennig's brigade, commanded by vonAmsberg and followed by Schusanowski's brigade, filed onto the fields north of the college under the watchful eye of Rhodes, whose division held the high ground that Schurz intended to occupy." Unquote. This is a present-day photo taken looking south-southeast down the crest of Oak Ridge and out to the east across the lower broad plain where the 11th Corps would initially deploy. The Carlisle Road can be seen in the distance. The Mummasburg Road can be seen heading into Gettysburg. Howard Avenue, along which are monuments commemorating the 11th Corps positions, can also be seen. As the noon lull was ending, Blackford's strong skirmish line of sharpshooters ran from Rock Creek, in the distance, with their right near the Red Barn and farmhouse of the Moses McLean farm. Dole's brigade was behind Blackford. When vonAmsberg led the 11th Corps onto the plains, the brigade took up an initial position along Howard Avenue. They advanced toward the farm and pushed back Blackford's right. Schusanowski's brigade soon took up a position behind vonAmsberg. The balance of the 11th Corps was marching its way through town, headed to the fields east of the Carlisle Pike. This photo is taken from Howard Avenue at about the location of vonAmsberg's brigade shown in the prior photo. It is looking west-northwest toward Oak Hill and Oak Ridge. The photographic position of the prior photo is shown. The northern end of Schurz Woods can be seen on the left. General Schurz wanted to position the 11th Corps to the right of the 1st Corps along Oak Ridge, but Rhodes's division, as explained earlier, beat him to the spot, occupying Oak Hill and the northern end of the ridge. Compounding Union Army problems was the presence of Doles's brigade in the plains further to the Union right. Blackford's sharpshooter battalion was in Doles's front. When vonAmsberg did arrive, he was able to push back Blackford's right and loosely connect with Baxter's brigade at the northern edge of Schurz Woods and Cutler's brigade in those woods. This photo is looking south from the southern edge of the woods on Oak Hill, with the guns of Carter and Fry deployed facing south. The Confederate brigades of Daniel, Iverson, and O'Neill were in the woods behind the camera position, to both the left and right of the batteries. Doles's Confederate brigade and Blackford's sharpshooters are on the plains below to the left. At this point, Rhodes's division is in complete control of the high ground, with a commanding view of the Union Army on the field in his front. vonAmsberg's 11th Corps brigade, with Shuzanovsky's brigade in position behind, is on the far left. Baxter's 1st Corps demi-brigade is facing Oak Hill at the northern edge of Schurz Woods. Cutler's brigade is in those woods. The Union artillery has been driven into the swale between Seminary Ridge and Herbst Woods. Only Stone's brigade remains on West McPherson Ridge. Meredith's brigade is in Herbst Woods, and Biddle's brigade is further south, to the right of Meredith. On the east and west slopes of Seminary Ridge is the balance of Baxter's brigade and Paul's brigade. The Confederate brigades of Pettigrew and Brockenborough are in the woods in front of the 1st Corps. To their rear on Herz Ridge is Pender's division, ready to join the inevitable afternoon fight. With Rhodes on the right flank of the Union Army, and Pender and Heath's divisions of Hill's Corps in front of Doubleday's 1st Corps, Lee's forces are poised to resume their morning attack, now from both the north and the west. With the arrival of the 11th Corps in vonAmsberg's skirmishing activity with Doles, and with Baxter's initial move to the north end of Schurz Woods and skirmishing encounters with O'Neill, with Biddle's struggle against Pettigrew's skirmishers at Willoughby Run, and with Union battery moves and subsequent engagement with rebel guns on Oak Hill, all shown earlier in this video segment, the noon lull was pretty much over. Once the complete 11th Corps arrived, the Federals had a little over 24,000 infantry and cavalry troopers on the field, versus a bit over 22,000 for the Confederates, while the rebels had an advantage in the number of artillery pieces, 84 to 54. But within a few hours, with the approaching division of Major General Ewell Early's 5,500 men, the numbers would swing back in favor of Lee's army. Of more significance, though, was the timing and location of that arrival. The next installment of this video series on Gettysburg Day 1 will focus on the expanded heavy fighting on not only the same grounds that witnessed the morning fights, but also on the plains and fields north of Gettysburg, leading up to Early's game-changing arrival from the east.